Good evening, welcome. I'm Reverend Jeff Snyder, and this is Beyond Loaves and Fishes, the live stream Bible study. Glad to be with you tonight. We're beginning a new project tonight. We're going to begin a new study here. We are moving on from our study of Walter Wink's The Powers That Be, and we're now moving on into a book by a colleague of mine, Reverend Douglas Avilesbernal, and it is called Welcoming Community Diversity That Works. To explore that in an age when there's an awful lot of intolerance going on, a lot of hatred that has been on the rise of late, and people feeling a lot freer to express that hatred in violence of one form or another. And we're going to talk about how to counter that, get some tools together that'll give us an opportunity to do just that. So, as you get here this evening, go ahead and say hi in the comments. Be prepared to engage with this tonight, and we'll all explore this topic together. So, hopefully, get people involved in just a minute or two. Then we'll get underway, making sure that everything is working the way it's supposed to be right now, and it seems to be. I hope you'll join us tonight. And if you're watching later, you're very welcome. We're glad that you're showing up whenever you are. This is a excellent topic for anyone, any given time. And we're always glad to have people stop by. Hi, Sherry. Glad you're here with us tonight. And hopefully we'll get a couple people more in a couple of minutes. Always glad that people are willing to take a little bit of time out of their evenings after a busy day to join us and study a new topic. So here we are. One thing that you need to know about this particular topic is that none of what we're exploring here in the next few weeks is intended as a negative critique of anyone or any institution. We are exploring how to improve ourselves, our lives, our community, including our church community. And it all begins with a little understanding of what we're talking about. We're talking about diversity here, but what does it mean? The culture's understanding of diversity falls short of the Christian-driven idea of the life of diversity. And the aim in cultural diversity is simply to enable a person to approach another person and not actively dislike them. But the goal is only to have them tolerate them. And there's nothing wrong with tolerance, especially when what is addressed is prejudice against and ignorance of another individual. But tolerance only goes so far. It only leads to staying out of each other's way, and that's not what we're looking for. That's not enough. Jesus wants us to engage with each other, to help one another. To love our neighbors, we have to know who our neighbors are. We have to know what their concerns are. So we've got to take it farther than merely tolerating each other or staying out of each other's way. That's just not going to get us where. So what we're looking at is called Christian diversity. And this complicates the goal of mere toleration. Hey, Lisa, glad you're here tonight. Because Jesus doesn't ask us only to learn how to live alongside our neighbors. Any study trying to help Christian community welcome differences must be rooted in Jesus's demand that we love one another as we love ourselves. Now, how do we do that? How do we change what we do to make this happen? And we're going to get into that. So, what is Christian diversity? It's a way of life that's far beyond mere toleration. It's life in community that welcomes and integrates differences as added riches that flow from God. That's a very different way of seeing people and seeing their differences and seeing their cultures as an addition of greater diversity, greater understanding, greater welcoming. So you can see how that's much fuller than what we have been talking about. And have you seen this in action anywhere in the world today? And a question that the author asks is why is it that we have trouble achieving this ideal of Christian diversity? Well, part of that involves leaving the familiar behind us. We have a problem with that. Would you agree with that? Or maybe for you, leaving the familiar behind is no problem at all. But for a great many, that is a very troublesome thing to do. So it's leaving home as if you were heading into another land. And how does that make you feel? You go into a different place, a place that's unfamiliar to you, a place where the customs are not the same, where people don't approach one another, or you can't approach them with the same shared background, shared understanding. So, if we work hard on this, while in the same physical place where we began, we won't be the same. We'll be a different people as we explore a different way to be in the world, getting out of our comfort zone and moving into new territory. Christian diversity is difficult because it's a world completely different from the one that most of us are used to. And that leads to a good deal of resistance. But there's a trouble with things being the same. There are churches that can be ethnically diverse, but still very much the same, very homogenous, you might say. How is that possible? Well, you can be ethnically diverse, and you can still be the same in your socioeconomic status, educational background, cultural background. Most of us worship in places where people are similar to ourselves in one way or another. And then, of course, Sunday morning is not always for church anymore. People no longer feel guilty if they don't come to church on Sunday morning. The world has changed a great deal. We're usually stuck in our ways. Yes, that's right, in our customs. Comfort feels good, and change can be uncomfortable. Absolutely. That causes a great deal of difficulty for a lot of us. But the world has changed a great deal, and sometimes we don't change along with it, and that can lead to a problem for a person or for an institution. This reality alienates us even more, and it compounds the difficulties of reaching out to others. Such distancing between us and being relevant to those outside of our neighborhood or our church clearly shows that we're in a completely different world, physically and emotionally. And that can be quite shocking. for a lot of people. The author observes despair seems the only feasible response to the challenges facing us individually or facing local congregations. We need a different way, different approach. We need a way to come at this from a different angle. And it starts with an honest assessment of ourselves as individuals or of our local church, if that's what we're talking about. We can assess where we think the world we're trying to reach actually is, which probably means bringing in fresh eyes to help explain the situation. But there's hope. And this book will look around the world to try to gain some distance from ourselves and see things more clearly so that we can approach things differently. In a period of upheaval in which traditional mores of faith have been uprooted and instability has been the result, where the faithful have been left uncertain what it means to be a church in the current societal context, we need to explore some options. Now, some folks will choose to circle the wagons and resist this form of change, even if it means the death of a community. Can you think of any examples of that? Others have searched for a new place in experimental ways, calling their churches Church 2.0. And there's a lot of people who believe that there are many versions of the truth. And we end up with all these little broken up fiefdoms, you might say, all seeking to be the next Holy Roman Empire, all with their particular version of the truth that they're espousing. So we sometimes retreat, shut the doors, shout at everyone outside that they ought to come into the fortress to weather the storm. There's a lot of challenge to this, in that you need to move forward, but you need to take it fairly slowly. Because if you push too hard and too soon, you can leave people behind. Or you can rail against your own efforts. Can't leave people feeling that as we move in new directions, try to welcome greater diversity, that we're throwing away the past that other people lived in, that we lived in ourselves. We're discarding what we loved. Not truly the case. While making a clear break with the past can feel good to a newer generation, a younger generation, you can lose a wealth of good information, practices and traditions that have a historical connection to the greater family of God. We have to listen to young people to hear them and to do something so we don't leave them behind either. It's an interesting challenge. Churches with long histories have a really big problem dealing with this Christian diversity, especially when they have long histories of their own. For many, the traditional church has a sense of importance around the people and events that created the church. So there's many reasons to appreciate where we've been, rooted in the fact that there are still people in the churches who remember good things that happened times before, and knew those who led the church to do good things. It becomes easier for people to become trapped in the past when they knew the beauty of the church as it was, and there's a lot of resistance to leaving it. And if you tell lifelong church members that what you hold dear, what was precious about the church, is now old fashioned and needs to go, well, you're just going to lose a lot of people. To move forward, we're going to explore ways to take the journey toward Christian diversity in ways that love everyone and seeks to keep everyone involved. Christian diversity is indiscriminate in giving love, fully embracing differences. It's eager to become family with others. The center of the effort is the fact that it's an emotional process that determines the outcome of the journey. And it's a demanding process, individually or in a church community. We have to prepare emotionally for this particular journey. We're engaging in intentional and profound emotional process that can be just what we need to stop an endless cycle and begin a journey to actually change and embracing all of God's children. Chapter 1, deal with the new realities. Today is sort of an introductory week. Just gone over the premise, and now we'll deal with the first chapter, and then I think we're just going to skipping around from one chapter to another, touching on a lot of the highlights. We're not going to go over the entire book here. Talk about the church that was. Basically, this book revolves around how to build stronger church communities, but it has a lot for individuals as well. So that's why we're going to be referencing church quite a bit. There will be a lot of useful material that individuals can take away, and that also can be applied to our churches as they try to become more relevant to the communities around them. Communities around us have changed a great deal. Pastor Avilesbernal pointed out to his community when they were going through struggles with this, that years ago, people complained about the strange new restaurants and businesses that were popping up in their community and that they didn't really like it much. They were Italian. And now people complain about the strange new communities and restaurants that are popping up in their community. And it was largely Latino in nature, Hispanic influence and says, relax. We've been here before. We're going to be here again. The other waves of immigrants. And they add wonderful diversity. He and I went out and had breakfast at a restaurant. It was South American in nature. Breakfast dish I'd never had before in my life. And it was absolutely fantastic. Wonderful bit of diversity. But it goes in cycles. By the early 1950s, in the United States, we'd felt we'd nearly conquered our country and the world. We're armed with continued success and great resources. And gradually we came to believe that we knew how to do church in the very best way. We lived in a world of certainties back in there, in which church had the answers and the government was trusted. And what are the byproducts of those times? What is carried on into today? When was another time like that? Well, another time when they had that level of certainty was in the early 20th century, before the Titanics. Of the Titanic, this is the ship that God. So these periods of great confidence come around every once in a while. And then there was a transformation in the 1960s. That confidence was shaken. Truths that had been taken for granted in the 50s were not only challenged openly, but were also ignored. By the mid-1960s, it was clear that the world was changing. And from the perspective of many churches, these changes were for the worse. Many churches chose to fight these changes and to try to regain lost ground. I remember as a child hearing a lot about real Christian, you'll stand up against these changes. Changes aren't right for us. I remember that quite vividly. Christians had to stand up and be counted, but basically counted in keeping things back in the 1950s. Since I wasn't born until 1959, that was didn't make a great impression on me. But when it became clear that there was an alarming rate at which people were falling off from church, it was threatening all the congregations. They tried to get them, the people that were leaving, back into worship and into fellowship activities that were meaningful in the old days, but to no avail. Times and the people were changing. As a result, churches drifted into a long and increasingly deeper isolation, where preservation became more important than exploration. Held firm and fought the devil, fought against new life and the people that were out of our church. And you can see how that plays out in life and how it can be alienating. We are no longer who we were, but many of us refuse to acknowledge that about ourselves, individually or as a community. We plan and expect the results to partly based on an image that we have of our church that no longer exists in the current world. There are misleading perceptions of ourselves and the world, and that's called confabulation. We think we know when we are lying to ourselves, but in truth, We're often ignorant of our own motives. We can create fictional narratives to explain our decisions, emotions, and our history without even realizing it. That's kind of spooky when you get right down to it. Can you think of examples of this, of confabulation? People have told themselves a story and come to believe it quite firmly, even when it's not true. I think we can think of some pretty recent examples of this that have had some fairly disturbing consequences in the world today. Now, the North American church has an amazing history of success over a number of centuries. Local congregations have always been a driving force in the life of church in the United States. Yet, as we face a brave new world, people may have started to believe that the local congregation's time has passed. But we can counter that. We become active and contributing to our neighbors, leading us to learn more about those who are around us. We can improve our connection. We can build bridges to the community. And we can understand better what people outside our walls or outside of our homes are struggling with, and where we can help and where they can help us. We find other people's strengths as well. New ways of solving problems, new ways of looking at the world around us. Different set of experiences informs other people's lives. And that if we're to truly understand each other, we need to understand those different experience sets. Can be wildly different from our own. We have to understand that we live now in a multicultural world. The world is definitely not the same as it was, particularly when I was a young child, growing up where I grew up. Is a big challenge. We want to move towards a society. We need to move towards a society that is much more tolerant and embracing of multiculturalism. And this is tremendously difficult. The main reason is many of us don't know how to navigate life without the old rules that we've been following. Social rules, racial rules. How many of us grew up in churches that declare we stand apart from our society, or we will disappear if we aren't distinctive from society? We'll just be absorbed into society. No difference at all. I grew up in it. Does anyone see this as part of the difficulty in dealing with multiculturalism? You refuse to engage with the world around you, if you continue to stand back and apart, rooted in another age and another set of traditions. Once upon a time, we all knew the rules, who mixed with whom and who didn't. Those rules were supposedly designed to keep the peace. Did they? These were private walls that kept people living in an orderly society, or so we were told. Local churches have been some of the most efficient and strong supporters of maintaining those walls. keeping segregation going for a great many years. How does that make you feel? It's unsettling, to say the least. And the clock on my computer tells me that ends chapter 1. That's a perfect place to stop for tonight. We'll talk about encountering new realities this week. Come back. Join with us again as we engage in this conversation and apply this to our lives and to our church communities. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate you being here, taking some time out of your busy day to come together with us. And again, if you're joining later, if you can't watch while we're live, but need to watch the recording at a later date, you're more than welcome. We're very glad you are here. So, God bless you all. And we'll do this again next week. And thank you for all your comments, Lisa. Truly appreciated. All right, let's pray together. Dear God, open our eyes, open our hearts, our minds, and our spirits, that we might learn to understand one another better. We might become equipped to live a truly multicultural society, learn to love our neighbors as ourselves, and work against the rising of hatred for others that is so prevalent today. Keep us safe. Keep us looking for new ways to follow your will in the world. Follow the two greatest commandments, you and love our neighbors well. We who love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you for coming again, and good night, and I will see you next week. So long.